Thanks very much, Ken. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament. Thanks for the opportunity to come and address you this evening around cities and particularly infrastructure. I agree with Ken's sentiment that you can't talk about cities without infrastructure and vice versa. It's really a great privilege to participate in this friendship group and talk about cities. That's something I'm very passionate about. Particularly like to acknowledge the honourable members and chairs, Jane Prentice, Andrew Giles and Adam Bant. As I say, I've always been passionate about cities, and that really is reflected in some of the great cities around the world that I've lived in, starting in Liverpool, which most people will know for the Beatles and Liverpool Football Club, but then on to Tokyo, which is a very different experience, a metropolitan population of about 34 million people, so a very different challenge. And then moving back to London and spending time in London through a transformational period when London was really dealing with some long-standing congestion issues and a period of lack of investment, and now most recently Sydney, which has been home for the last 8 years. So as I say, I've been in Sydney for the last 8 years and really continued that focus on cities. It's something that I played a key role in terms of shaping, planning and developing, helping to develop Sydney as a city for the last 8 years, and something that I brought to this role of CEO of Infrastructure Australia. So tonight I'd like to do a couple of things. First and foremost, give you a bit of an update in terms of what Infrastructure Australia's been up to, and as Ken mentioned, that really started with the release of 2 audits back in May. But I'd also like to provide some insights into the kind of thinking that's going into the 15-year infrastructure plan, and also how that relates very particularly to the development of our cities. So if I can get the slides working. So just again, as Ken mentioned, we had a refresh last year with multi-party support. The Infrastructure Australia Act was amended, and really that repositioned IA as an independent body with a board with the right to appoint a CEO, and the board was established in September of last year, and I started as CEO at the end of April of this year. And soon after that, we released the first audit. That was around Northern Australia, and then towards the end of May, released an audit focused across the whole of Australia, and really that provided us with a great evidence base, a top-down review of the key drivers of our infrastructure, and particularly the demand, and that was projected out to 2031. And as you know, our main remit has been to look across the economic infrastructure of transport, water, energy and telecommunications. So in terms of the key population drivers, and I think this is really a central kind of message for this evening, the key findings from the audit were really within a context that we're projecting that the population growth would be towards 30.5 million by 2031. And very particularly, this growth would occur in our 4 major capital cities. Now, what the audit identified was 10 reform challenges, and these are challenges we will need to address if we're going to effectively deal with that population growth. But we also identified some other challenges, such as congestion, which we found is projected to grow to $53 billion per annum. That's assuming we don't invest any more money in infrastructure, and of course we hope we'll do that. But these challenges, as you can see on the screen, cover a broad range of areas, so everything from productivity to funding, to governance, best practice and connectivity, just to name a few, and you can read the rest. But that's really provided us with a great base, and since the release of the audit, we've been engaging around the country with representatives from all levels of government, as well as businesses, industry, peak bodies and the community. And really that communication, that engagement has been very much around encouraging submissions. So keeping in mind we were developing a 15-year plan, we've been really working hard to get submissions from around the country to help us address some of the some of the challenges that we found in the audit, as well as the high-level issues. We also did some detailed modelling and very particularly looked at some of the transport corridors that will be challenging, and that's been a big focus of some of the submissions that we've had. So we've had over 100 submissions. They range in everything from policy advice to specific projects and long-term ideas of how we might reform our infrastructure, but also some of the future solutions we might need. And the plan really that responds to that is going to be a strategic policy and reform response. It's going to be based on those 10 challenges on the screen, but we've grouped those under 4 key themes, so to try and make the story a bit easier to follow. So that the focus, and the first one's the key one, I think, for this group. So the focus is very much around productive cities and regions. Then we're looking at efficient infrastructure markets, sustainable and equitable infrastructure, and then finally better decision-making and delivery. And I'll touch on each of those as I continue with the presentation. So in terms of the policy and reform piece, then obviously that's a central part of the plan. But we're also refreshing the infrastructure priority list. And I think this is an area that many have been interested in. And in the past, I think we've generally seen a decline in the level of planning that we've been doing, the level of investment in developing studies and business cases. And that's been very much something I've noticed since I've been in this role the last 6 months. So what we've done through this engagement process around the country is really gone back to basics, using the evidence of the audit, and very much encouraging jurisdictions, as well as the private sector, to think about what some of the longer term problems are and what potential solutions might be. And so that's the bit that happens before we develop a specific solution and a project and a business case. And those things we're describing as initiatives, so that's longer term thinking. So we're going to be identifying some of those as part of the refresh of the priority list. And then in addition to that, there'll be specific projects which are fully formed, fully developed, have a full business case which we can assess, and those will be on the priority list as well. So that's a quick overview of what you can expect to see in the plan. Now, I think that there's one other message I wanted to take the opportunity to get across to this group in particular, that on occasion there's confusion around our role in assessing projects and also in terms of who develops the business case. So just for clarity, Infrastructure Australia does not develop business cases. We're basically reviewing business cases that have been developed by proponents, and they're not always from the jurisdictions. We also receive them from the private sector. But as I say, we've been working closely with all the jurisdictions to put these lists of initiatives and projects together, really using the audit as the basis for that. These 2 lists, I think when you see them, you'll see that they'll present government with or governments, I should say, of the state and territory level and federal government, present the opportunity to prioritise initiatives and projects that really have been through a process that's well considered, identifies nationally significant problems, has solutions that have strategic merit, and also provide productivity enhancing benefits. So that's the quick overview, the advertorial, if you will, for what we're up to, and the plan is an important deliverable for us, which will be delivered early next year. So what I'd like to do now is talk more specifically about cities, which is obviously the theme of tonight. And I think the work we're doing is very relevant to cities. So this strategic approach, I think, is really crucial to developing some of the solutions that we're particularly seeing come through in our cities, and particularly off the back of this population forecast, which, to remind you again, 40% increase in the next 15 years out to 2031, which takes us to about 30.5 million people. And just to put that into context, or one lens of context, that's the equivalent to 1 new Canberra a year for the next 15 years. So 1 new Canberra a year for the next 15 years. And put that into some global context, we rank 4th out of 40 OECD countries for population growth over the decade to 2012. And indeed, we're the fastest growing with a population over 10 million. So we're leading the charge with this population growth. There's no question about that. And just to put that into some context there on the slide in terms of how that kind of looks across the capital cities, as you can see, the vast majority of that growth is in the 4 largest cities at the moment. That's the forecast: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. And by 2031, those cities are expected to grow by 46%. And if you take that out further to 2061, we can see Brisbane and Perth will increase to approximately 5 million people. Melbourne and Sydney will have up to 9 million people. And just to put that back into global perspective, that means cities like Melbourne and Sydney could be the size of London, New York, and Hong Kong today. And I think that kind of grabs your attention in terms of, you know, my brief comment earlier about what Tokyo looked like with a very extreme number of 34 million, but based on the experience in London and seeing a very modest growth there and the pressures that put on London as a city, you know, it kind of, I think, is something of a wake-up call for us in terms of the opportunity that's ahead of us, and it very much is an opportunity rather than a challenge. And one of the challenges that we've got to address through this process is one of housing affordability. Again, in terms of that growth, we're looking at between 500,000 and 700,000 additional dwellings in the next 15 years. This new housing will obviously have to be supported by upgraded and new transport infrastructure, important for connecting people to jobs, but also for connecting our markets and our goods. Similarly, we're going to have to handle an increase in the freight task, and the audit found that the land freight task will increase by 80% to 2031. So it's not just moving people, it's moving goods. So I guess the big question for us tonight is, how do we ensure we handle this significant opportunity, which is one we should embrace, while still maintaining our enviable quality of life? And in the last few weeks, we've been doing some comparisons, looking around the world to inform our plan. And I think the interesting thing is that when you look at other cities such as, which we don't like doing, but if you look at other cities such as New York and London, they've taken a very interesting approach, which I think is relevant to the time and place of their evolution. They're very much focused on outcomes and very focused on measuring the performance of the city. So I think that's something for us to consider. How do we actually measure the performance of our cities today, and how are we going to maintain that into the future, and importantly, maintain that quality of life? And so just to illustrate for your information what these documents say, so the one New York, the London 2036 document is really an agenda focused on jobs and growth. In the case of New York, they're focused on dynamic urban economy as an inclusive economy, sustainability and resilience. In the case of London, it's about being a global hub, a creative engine, a city that works. But in the London plan, they're starting to map these goals against possible actions and metrics. So not totally relevant to our cities, but in the case of London, one of the examples is they want to be a global hub. So the theme is global hub. One of the actions is to improve global access. And they're going to measure that by looking at London, how London can become the leading destination for international visitors. Under the creative engine theme, they're looking to improve funding for growing small to medium enterprises. So one of the targets there is to create twice as many £100 million businesses than they've got today. So interesting approach, but I think the good thing about what they're doing is they're painting a vision for their cities, and they're being very clear about what the outcomes are they want to achieve and putting some metrics in place to measure that. So what does that mean for us in terms of our Australian cities? Well, I think that the challenge for us that we need to be having these similar conversations. We need to be creating the same kind of plans and incentives to get to the same point and to deal with this opportunity that we have. And as I mentioned, we've been getting lots of input to our plan, and you know, in 100 submissions, we've had lots of suggestions about how we might deal with population growth and manage our cities more effectively. And obviously a lot of discussion in that input is around density and increasing density, but the importance of doing that well and actually planning that thoughtfully and thinking about how it fits into the broader fit of the city. Other people have told us that we need to be looking at how do we actually move some of the population growth that's currently forecast to be on the previous slide in the 4 largest cities. How can we rebalance that so we have more growth in some of our smaller capital cities and make the best use of the infrastructure we have there? But one of the overriding messages we've been getting, and this is certainly something we've been seeing, and I've seen through the last few months, is that there's really there really is a need to have a greater mix of high-capacity public transport and active transport, and that really is something I think the next tipping point in terms of the growth of our cities is going to need. But having said all of that, this is all fine, but it all starts with having a long-term infrastructure plan. And I think the important thing with that is this plan needs to be integrated with our land use planning. And we need to do that in the context of a greater vision for our cities, a clarity around what the outcomes are we want to achieve. And that really, I think, embraces the opportunity that's ahead of us and really is, you know, if one of the primary measures is livability or quality of life, which I think we all agree is second to none, then that's something we need to keep hold of and actually keep central to our planning moving forward. And I found this chart very interesting, and for the Melburnians here, they're always celebrating on an annual basis the success of Melbourne being top of the livability rankings. But I think that list has got 4 Australian cities in the top 10, which is really fantastic and something we should celebrate. But actually, it's also a threat, because if you look at the cities on there and look at how the livability is measured, what tends to happen is as the population increases, as we increase density, as we move to mass transit, and so on and so forth, cities tend to drop off, normally drop off this list. So I think that's our call to arms. How can we maintain our high profile on that top 10 list and keep our cities as the envy of the world in terms of livable cities, whilst dealing with an extended period of growth? So that's really, I think that's really the challenge. We've done it before, so I think we can do it again. But it's really critical that we put that, I think, at the centre of the debate that we should have around our cities, particularly around the infrastructure we need, what outcomes we're trying to achieve, and bringing that back to the plan. That's something we're very focused on in terms of our 15-year plan. It's going to outline an ambitious infrastructure reform agenda across every economic infrastructure sector, which will help Australia reap the many social and economic benefits that this population growth will bring, whilst trying to maintain that quality of life. But I think the bottom line with any plan is it's only as good as the action that comes from it. And really, the responsibility for leading reform falls to all of us, to governments, to business, to peak bodies such as the Property Council and the wider community. So I really think this is a call to arms in terms of getting a greater focus on our cities, that really this demand of population and economic growth is putting in front of us. So I think that this is a great opportunity. We should seize it with both hands, try and maintain that livability performance, which is second to none. We've done it before, we can do it again, so I look forward to working with you over the coming months. Look forward to working with you over the coming months, and particularly look forward to launching the 15-year plan next year and keeping this focus on cities. Thanks very much.